Hello and welcome to Giving Ventures, a podcast to help you grow your giving and change the world for the better. Each episode, we share innovative charitable efforts leveraging private philanthropy to solve public problems. I'm your host, Peter Lipset, Vice President at Donors Trust. This show is a product of Donors Trust, the oldest and largest donor-advised fund focused on helping conservative and libertarian donors of all capacities simplify, protect, and grow their giving. My colleagues and I talk with a lot of groups doing great work. This show lets us share a bit of what we learned with you, so you can discover new projects for your own philanthropy. It has been gospel amongst many conservative donors for a long time that no one who appreciates classically liberal values should be giving, frankly, any money to the modern university. From elite schools to state schools to community colleges, none of them seem to be immune from this virus of running counter to the values that many of their most generous donors share. So back in episode 26, we sat down with Emily Jay of the Foundation for Academic Renewal at ACTA and discussed how donors could protect their donor intent if they were giving to colleges and universities. Today, we're going to go with a little bit different tack following the mess that we've seen on too many college campuses in the wake of the Hamas attacks in Israel back in October. And we have seen a lot of donors who are just fed up and say they're giving up on higher ed entirely. Today, I'm joined by my friend Hans Zeiger. Hans is president of the Jack Miller Center in Philadelphia, which does important work to defend American values, promote civics education, and develop strong academic leaders, and has been thinking a lot about this and what donors should be doing. So, Hans, it seems like every few years there is something that causes all of these folks to you get 1,000 think pieces launched about why donors shouldn't give to campuses anymore, and then you have the October 7th atrocities, the anti-Semitism that followed on campuses. It actually launched a think piece from you, a great one, in Law and Liberty called "The Next Step for Disaffected Donors." But we've seen this story before. Do you really think this time is different? Do you think calls for change are really going to get heated now?
Well, thanks, Peter, for having me on. It's great to be with you. And I do think this time is different. I mean, I've been observing higher education for a while from different angles. One being working a lot on higher education policy as a state legislator back in my home state of Washington. And I think that this time is different. We're seeing donor action, not just talk. Some very major donors to big institutions, elite institutions saying, we're not going to give money anymore, or at least we're withholding money until things change at their alma mater. And we saw resignations of two Ivy League presidents. I mean, that was a big deal. And you saw a public backlash to the kind of testimony that they gave the presidents of Harvard and Penn before Congress. And so and public attitudes are changing. And this is not just about the rise of ideology on campus and the, just huge evidence of anti-Semitism on college campuses, but public attitudes are changing because of economic factors, because they're questioning the value proposition of a four-year degree under the economic circumstances following first the recession years ago, and more recently the pandemic. And, so I think, a lot of the kind of cost factors that are involved with higher education are really causing people to question the value proposition. And it doesn't mean that we should abandon higher education. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest in it as a society, but it does mean that we should think about some different choices that we might make to renew our higher education system and to make it truly the engine of dynamism that it has been and really continues to be in many ways, where people from all over the world come to America to get a higher education. And there are good reasons why alumni have long invested in their alma maters, why they see the value of that, both for them personally and for their families and for generations to come. So we should not give up on higher education, but we should make some choices differently than we have.
So I guess this is the cynical question that I have is, do the universities even really care? I mean, they have so much money. Are the dollars being withheld even significant enough to to matter to force change?
I mean, I would come back to the fact that we did have two university presidents resigned. Now, how much was that a function of major donors saying that they were going to withhold money? I'm not sure how that factored in versus the immediate public backlash to the words that they said in that congressional hearing. So, I guess I would put the Ivy Leagues and these top elite universities in a little bit different category than the rest of higher education when it comes to the pressures that they face, because they are to some degree insulated by these massive endowments, as you point out. But the economics of higher education, as it affects the vast majority of Americans, I think are really worth paying attention to as we think about this other problem of ideology on college campuses that has come to light. I spent a lot of my time when I was in the state legislature of Washington working on higher ed policy and looking at the cost side. So often, we were thinking about where is money coming from? Is there going to be more state money available? And what's the rate of tuition? Well, what are the cost drivers? Very few people are paying attention to those, and they are significant. I mean, we're talking about one of the priciest items that any American is ever going to pay for, higher education. And frankly, higher education costs too much. And so I tried to call attention to that. I tried to figure out how can we have more transparent cost accounting for higher education spending. And boy, when you start to raise that issue, the institutions freak out. They do not want a whole lot of public transparency about how money is being spent. But more and more Americans really are right now questioning that value proposition. I mean, when all of a sudden during the pandemic, courses went online and the many thousands of dollars that the families were paying for higher education were, you could have spent much less to get an online education than parents and students were paying. And so there are many more efficient ways to get an education, to get information, to get up to speed. Is a college education with a 4-year degree going to equip somebody for the economy that we're in? I mean, with it, the economy evolving so quickly and the job market evolving so quickly, that is a question that I think has been asked in recent years, where somebody who may go to a trade school and do so in a year or two is going to be much more competitive in the job market than somebody with a 4-year degree. So people are changing their habits, changing their behaviors, changing the way that they think about the market of higher education. And this is front and center for, a lot of non-elite institutions. I mean, there were 15 colleges that shut down in 2023, mostly small private colleges that just could not put together the financing to stay afloat. And I think we're going to continue to see more of that. We have market oversaturation in some parts of the country. We have, too many universities trying to be all things to all people. And that has been the predominant model of a university for the last 100 years, essentially. And that model is just not going to work out. I mean, and that is related to the problem of not seeing the purpose of a university or the mission of a university as the pursuit of truth. Because if you see it as the pursuit of truth, okay, now we're gonna narrow things a little bit. It's not going to be all things to all people. Certain things are going to be valued more than others, and certain truths are going to come to light, and we're going to pay close attention to that. But there's this atmosphere of relativism that has come to predominate in universities, and you talk about the pursuit of truth. I mean, Veritas is the Harvard motto, and many other universities talk about Veritas in their mottos, but truth is really not valued in most of higher education these days. And I think those who are going to be the winners and who are going to be able to differentiate themselves from this all things to all people model that has predominated are going to be those who say, we value truth. The purpose of the university is to pursue truth. And I think they're going to benefit from that. University presidents who say truth matters are going to benefit from that.
Well, to go back to something you touched on about transparency, I have this theory, and you tell me, because you've seen it, you've probably seen this both from your political seat and from now your nonprofit seat. I don't think a lot of donors really understand what they're giving to when they give unrestricted dollars into a college. And I wonder if you have seen that shift in terms of how poorly those dollars are used over time, and or just have any insight into how donors should be thinking about unrestricted dollars they're giving to these schools?
Yeah, it's a great question because you start looking into budgets and where the growth is in higher ed budgets. Huge growth in higher ed administration, and I guess I'd point to three things that donors, students, parents, alumni ought to be aware of, and too few are aware of. First of all, that administrative bloat, and many other institutional stakeholders are well aware of this. I mean, a lot of faculty are well aware of the problems of administrative bloat, and you have deans of this and associate vice presidents of that, and you name a problem. There's some administrator whose job is to tackle that problem, and it over bureaucratization is a problem in any institution, and it has become a problem in American higher education. The second problem I'd point out is research bloat. The incentive structure for academia is not about teaching as much as it is research. Now, that's different at community colleges, it's different at a lot of smaller colleges, but we have incentives built into the professoriate across the board to do research. Now, that makes a whole lot of sense when it comes to the sciences, the hard sciences, when it comes to a lot of fields where you can do something to make a breakthrough in our understanding and how we solve problems. It doesn't make the same degree of sense in the humanities and the social sciences, where you need a body of understanding that's passed along from generation to generation. Yes, there is room for new understanding of subjects, and yes, academic freedom matters when it comes to that stuff. But there should be my point is there should be more incentive for teaching in some of these fields, and we could save some money for tuition payers and taxpayers and donors, et cetera, if we focus more on teaching instead of research in some fields, including history and political science, where a lot of my work focuses. And then the third thing is what I've already mentioned, which is that universities have tried to become all things to all people. That's just an unsustainable model. Universities in this day and age are going to have to focus on certain things, certain core competencies, and I think they'll be rewarded for doing so.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it in that terms of them trying to be all things of all people. You feel like universities specialize in some way, shape, or form, but if they try to make everyone happy, which is really what they're so often trying to do, they dig a hole for themselves, and they have room to specialize too. Well, so we've talked a lot about the problems. Let's turn to some solutions, because in that article that I referenced earlier, you talked about some solutions. Your work at the Jack Miller is built on solutions. What can donors do? Is there a winning argument, A, to just finally wake donors up to be like, no, really, there's lots of other things you can do with your money? I mean, I'm guilty. I still give a small amount to my alma mater, right? It's a hard habit to break. So how do you break that habit? But also, where should they be putting these dollars that they might want to see go towards making sure we actually have professors who are allowing free and open discourse, and colleges that are instilling these civic values? And
yeah, no, you're absolutely right that alumni loyalty is a real thing, and it's not my job to go out and persuade alumni that they should not give to their alma mater. And I mean, I think there are many good reasons why people would give to their alma mater and support higher education in some of the ways that they've done. My plea to donors would be, let's also think about the talent pipelines for faculty and leadership in our universities that cannot be neglected if we want to secure a better future for higher education that values the liberal tradition, that values what we always refer to as the American political tradition in the work that we do at the Jack Miller Center, the founding principles and history of our country that ought to be taught in our universities, particularly in our history departments and political science departments and related areas of the university that unfortunately have neglected, in many ways, have neglected the teaching of those things. And so our project has been to cultivate the rising generation of scholars. We now have over 1,100 scholars in our network who are devoted to the American political tradition. And we would ask donors to consider the kinds of investments and talent pipelines that we've been about, but that other organizations like the Institute for Humane Studies has been about in their work to get more free market thinkers into the university, more classical liberals into the university.
And this is an important point too, because you can get you can have an outsized impact by having a really good professor even at a crappy school. John Tomasi is one I often point to. I think it's now left Brown running Heterodox Academy, but for a
Mm.
long time he was this little conservative libertarian enclave in Brown University, but was one of the most popular professors there on campus. And they really can have an outsized impact because they're not getting that perspective from the traditional progressive woke professor.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not the profession that would pull highest among popular professions in the country. Nurses and firefighters and a bunch of others would probably um, pull have a higher popularity rating than professors. But boy, when it comes to shaping the intellectual um, um, culture of our country, laying intellectual foundations for how we think about our country, um, scholars in the university matter a great deal. And by the way, if you want to train effective K-12 teachers, you better pay attention to how they're getting their training in universities. That's another body of work that we're focused on, and is how do we equip K-12 teachers through master's programs, through professional development programs made possible through university, outstanding scholars who are doing good work in the university. So we cannot neglect this. And by the way, I mean, if we want good administrators, if we want good leaders in our universities, we need to invest in scholars and other leaders who are coming up, rising up in the ranks. And so there's a talent pipeline investment that has been um, quietly done by some. I mean, there's a heritage of foundations, many known to listeners of this podcast, like the Olin Foundation, the Bradley Foundation, who've invested in scholars over the generations. But we need to do more of that in this time.
So that's one avenue that donors can pursue. They can actually help cultivate the talent via group organizations like what Jack Miller Center is doing, IHS, several others are doing this at various levels. What else? Where else can they put their money so they feel like they're helping advance these ideas on campus, good, classically liberal ideas on campus, without actually giving them to the university itself?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there actually is an argument for giving to universities in the case that they demonstrate um, that they are committed to truth or are committed to the teaching mission, not just the research that I talked about. I mean, research is important in some fields, but teaching ought to be valued in universities. And they ought to show a commitment to civic purpose, show that they care about the well being of the quality of citizenship in our country, and that they're willing to invest in that in terms of their teaching and in terms of other commitments that they make. So if a university president and a university and its various programs says we're serious about the truth, serious about civic purpose, serious about teaching, folks ought to consider investing there. The second thing is I think people ought to support programs that are reaching students outside the classroom with readings from the liberal tradition. And so, those might be extracurricular campus centers that people can support. They may include reading groups and lecture series on campus so there's a targeted investment and some good work that's going on campus. Or it could include summer programs. And I'll just mention the Hertog Fellowship, the Hudson Institute Political Studies Program, the Fund for American Studies, the Foundation for Economic Education, just to use some examples of some very good, programs with a long track record of making a difference in the lives of undergraduate students. And those are absolutely worthy of folks' support.
Hans, where can folks find out about those types of programs? Is there a master list somewhere?
Well, we support a number of different campus centers that are devoted to the American political tradition, and those are listed on our website, jackmillercenter.org. And so that would be one place people can go to see, and those are mostly political scientists who are setting up programs for their students, lecture programs, Constitution Day programs for their campus. Another place to go look would be the American Council of Trustees and Alumni has a list of 90 oases of excellence. And these are campus centers that they can vouch for, and they're trying to bring together who, share certain things in common. The pursuit of truth, a commitment to open inquiry and discussion and intellectual diversity. And there's certain things that these programs hold in common. So I would recommend that as well.
Oh, that's good. All right. I derailed you from your third point.
Yeah, well, the third point I've covered to some degree already, and that is just creating an infrastructure for serious scholarship. And that's about investing in talent pipelines, not just getting people into graduate school, but also making sure that we're investing in opportunities for serious scholars to get tenure. I mean, to have a long-term successful career in the academy. And we want to find ways to promote academic leaders, academic entrepreneurs who value truth, virtue, and civic purpose. So I mentioned IHS, another organization worth looking into that's involved in talent pipeline work, and I think is doing some very good work with their scholars, is the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. And IHS has been around since the 60s. Institute for Citizens and Scholars has been around since just after World War II. Our organization, the Jack Miller Center, which invests in talent pipelines for scholars of the American political tradition, we've been around for 20 years. And we have over 1,100 scholars in our network who are just doing very important work, very, very often lonely work in their fields, but deserve the support of their fellow Americans who really share a common cause to the future of citizenship. And boy, I'll point out, this is super important stuff as we think about the 250th anniversary of our country coming up in 2026. As we think about what can we do together as a country, how can we celebrate our shared inheritance of freedom, the responsibility of being a citizen in a self-governing country, the privilege of that. Investing in civic education at every level is really important, and that includes higher education.
You've mentioned that you used to be a legislator out in Washington State. You've seen up close the machinations of legislative involvement with higher education, and we've seen some political attempts, particularly down in Florida, with some of the stuff that Ron DeSantis has done. Is there, we never want to advocate for more government, but when government can actually help create better solutions and create more freedom, there's good public policy organizations that help advocate for that. Have you seen positive involvement with state legislators to help get any of this back on track, or is that really not a great tree to bark up?
One of the really promising things happening in public higher education right now, which is the largest share of how higher education is done. The vast majority of students are going to be involved in public higher education of some kind, whether it's community college, public four-year institution, or otherwise. And we're seeing the emergence of schools of civic thought that state legislatures are enacting and funding in several states now. This started in Arizona with Arizona State University and their School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. Governor Doug Ducey and the Arizona legislature created this. It was then started and run for several years by Paul Carisse, who really made a go of it and demonstrated that this could be a model for other institutions in the country. So now we're seeing University of Texas Austin has gotten their Civitas Institute and now a School of Civic Leadership off the ground. We're seeing the Hamilton Center at the University of Florida, the Institute for American Civics at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and now recently the Ohio legislature approved 5 schools of civic thought in Ohio. We're seeing institutions come to fruition in Utah, and one is about to start in North Carolina, and another one in Florida at Florida State is about to start. So these are really promising ways for undergraduates to get an education in American civics, to understand civic leadership, to do the readings from great books and from the American political tradition so that they can be prepared for leadership roles in our free society. And this is the kind of thing that we need. This has been neglected. Our public universities have neglected their civic mission for a long time, but with this kind of an innovation, we can see some real change. What this is not is, conservatives need to have some bulwark in the university. What this is we need a forum for young people of all political stripes to learn about the civic foundations of our country, because they're not going to get that in very many places. So very encouraged by that. We see this movement growing. Paul Carese has just come on board as a senior fellow of the Jack Miller Center, and he's doing really great work to help organize this movement throughout the country.
Oh, that's great. That is encouraging. So you've given us a lot of different organizations. We'll try to put as many as we can in the show notes here so people can look them up and find them. But any final words, any final advice to donors who are throwing their hands up and saying, I care about higher ed, this matters, but I'm done. Just a final synopsis of what we would tell them.
Yeah, I would say don't give up on higher education. I mean, just thinking about the civic purpose of higher education, which is what I spend most of my time thinking about. I mean, George Washington saw the value of civic education. He thought there ought to be a national university where the leaders of the country could come together and study the same things so they could develop a common set of national values. But he talked about why he cared about that, why civic education matters. And that was that in a free society, we can't just rely on the leaders of society to have civic knowledge. No, we're all self-governing. That means that it is our responsibility to know certain things, to be able to think reflectively about certain things. And it's not just, trivial knowledge or factual knowledge, like we often think about. I mean, I think when we think about civic education, we tend to think, civics in middle school, memorizing certain kind of facts about how many members of Congress and, how many branches of government, those kinds of things. But, George Washington said in his very first message to Congress, people ought to be prepared to think deeply about freedom and about the difference between freedom and tyranny, about human rights, about what justice is, and about what our responsibilities are as a free people. I mean, he had been through the revolution. He had been through the founding of a country. He understood why this kind of thing was really important for people to know about. So the intellectual foundations of freedom are a big deal. And so much of that work goes on in our higher education system. So we best not neglect it. We best figure out ways to reform it and make the most of it and channel it in the directions that it ought to go. And I have not given up on this. That's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, why I decided to leave a career in politics and think, this is really the cause of our generation, is how do we make our education system from K-12 through college work in a way that can fuel our continued success as a free society.
I think that's a great thought to end on, and a good call to action and call to arms to keep supporting this stuff, because it is important. Hans Zeiger, thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for all you do.
As we said at the outset, donors are continually getting angry at universities as these schools turn away from classically liberal values, or even just the willingness to allow for open discourse in the first place. Perhaps Hans is right that this time is different. But what hasn't changed, and frankly is only going to get better, is the wide range of options that donors like you have for where to put your dollars to support a thriving culture of higher learning. I recommend looking at ACTA's Oases of Excellence that Hans mentioned, as well as Hans's own Jack Miller Center and its website, to see some of these different centers that are out there that would take your support and do good things with it. You also might check out the Institute for Humane Studies and some of the professors that they're working with as well. Need more ideas? Well, we at Donors Trust are happy to dig into this area or whatever your area of interest is and help you find organizations, play matchmaker a little bit, so we can help you find places to give that align with your priorities. We want to see positive change in the world just as much as you do, and we are thrilled to be able to help you with it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to having you with us for the next great conversation, and until then, thank you for being a giver. Let's talk more soon.